But again, we're here to talk about ocelots in Arizona, specifically ocelot number 7, that was recently named Himdam with the San Xavier Tohono O'odham community that was detected on wildlife cameras in 24 and 2025. We are lucky to be joined today with two stellar research scientists from the region, Kinley Reagan of Phoenix Zoo and Sue Malusa, to help tell this story of this incredible ocelot. As I mentioned at the top, this presentation will be kind of a guided conversation. At the end, there'll be a chance for a question and answer session. As you have questions during the presentation, please enter them in the chat and we'll make sure to address them during that question and answer period at the end. But I'd say we're good to take it away. Kinley, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kinley Reagan. I'm the project manager for the Field Conservation Research Department at the Phoenix Zoo. And I have been working in the US-Mexico borderlands for about 10 years now. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today and also with my two great colleagues, Eamon and Sue Malusa. So Sue, please go ahead.
Thank you, Kinley. I'm Susan Malusa and Director of the University of Arizona Wildcat Research and Conservation Center. And I lead a long-term community science-driven monitoring program focused on jaguars and ocelots. And for about 15 years now, we've been using non-invasive methods, primarily camera traps paired with genetics and environmental DNA to understand the species and how they're using the landscape and what this means for connectivity and conservation.
Awesome. Thank you both very much. I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Aidan Harity. I'm the Wildlife Program Manager at Sky Island Alliance. We have cameras throughout the borderlands, understanding the impacts of border construction on the movements of species like ocelots and javelina and coyote and all the animals we love on the landscape. But before we dive into the specific story of this ocelot shown in this photo, Himdam or number 7, Kinley, would you talk a little bit about what an ocelot is, where they are found, and some of the natural history?
Yes, absolutely. So ocelots are small cat or felid. They're about twice the size of a house cat, and they're a little bit larger than a bobcat. They're really unique species. You can see they have these spotted patterns all over them. And the name ocelot is actually, there's many different names that people can often refer to ocelots as. It really depends on the region that they're in and the kind of cultural understanding around ocelots. So some of those names are off here to the left. You can see that, yeah, they range in where those names would make sense to different people. And in some areas, these names are actually used for multiple species too. So it can be kind of confusing what you're referring to. But in Arizona, we refer to ocelots mostly as ocelot. And they're solitary cats. They do tend to be nocturnal. They're great climbers. And like other cats, they're carnivores. And so they're going to prey on species that are smaller than them. You can think like rodents, rabbits, possums. In some cases, there's been records of them preying on armadillos. But most of the time, they're focusing on species that are going to be around 1 kilogram in size, which is like 2.2 pounds or a little smaller. And if we can go to the next slide, we can talk about where ocelots occur. So this is a map of the Americas, and you can see in the red is where the designated ocelot habitat is across the Americas. And they range all the way from southern Argentina down there at the bottom in the south up to North America into Arizona and Texas. And they're most commonly found in South America. You can see all that red there. But they do, as you can see, come up through Central America and have these two kind of lines wandering through the Sierra Madres up to Arizona. So if we go to the next one, Perfect. Thank you, Eamon. So they're a part of the Leopardus lineage, and Leopardus actually means spotted fur. So there are 8 other species that are within this genus, listed here and some pictures on the right. And what you can see there is all the species in this Leopardus genus are not only belong in the Americas, but they also have those unique spotting patterns on their fur. And so it's a really cool way to distinguish them from some other cat species in the Americas are the spottedness of their different fur. And each species within Leopardus has kind of a unique different way of having those spotted patterns as well. And so that's one way to distinguish them is like the size of the spots or how elongated they are, and different characteristics like that. And I don't know about many of you on this call, but some of these species, even to me, are new. And I'm always happy to find a new spotted cat species like I think it's called Jeffrey's cat. To me, they're really cute little species. So definitely look up some of these other amazing American spotted cats or spotted cats in the Americas, North and South America. So
Kinley,
yeah,
just quickly, you mentioned that in Costa Rica, you've had experience where they refer to some of these other cats by the name Tigrillo, or have you
yeah.
seen other spotted cats in your work in Costa Rica?
Yeah, so I have the pleasure of working both in the US-Mexico borderlands and the Atascosa complex and also in southern Costa Rica, where there's a lot of species overlap, not just the spotted cats, but javelina, mountain lion, a lot of other white-nosed coati species co-occur there. And in Costa Rica, I actually get to work with 4 species of smaller spotted cats down there. So we have the ocelot, the oncilla, the margay, and the tigrillo, which is an even smaller little cat. The northern tiger cat is the oncilla. And so down there, tigrillo doesn't refer to ocelot, but I think, Eamon, you were saying in Sonora, they refer to ocelot as tigrillo, right? So yeah, so it gets a bit confusing there, but the names often are related all to some kind of spotted cat situation. But yeah, I've got 3 species down there, which is really great and also incredibly confusing sometimes on the wildlife cameras.
I bet.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide, this is a really awesome graphic from Sky Island Alliance. Sue and I myself were talking about how great of a graphic this is. And it just kind of shows you not only the species of cat that we are fortunate to have in the Sky Island regions of Arizona, but also the size comparisons. And so you can see the humans on the far left, and then we've got jaguar, mountain lion, ocelot, bobcat, and then your average house cat. So with ocelot kind of in the middle right there, you can see that they're substantially smaller, obviously, than a mountain lion, but they're a decent size, bit bigger than a bobcat. But bobcat's probably the most comparable size that you'll find in the regions. And this graphic, what I also love about it is it just really exemplifies the amazing biodiversity of many species, but this graphic shows cats that we're fortunate to have in the Sky Islands. So kudos to Sky Island Alliance for this awesome graphic, and I think we'll be borrowing it occasionally.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that context on the species and where it's found, Kinley. I want to touch briefly on ocelots in the United States. We have 2 populations primarily. In South Texas, there's actually a breeding program where they're raising ocelots and releasing to help augment that population. It's restricted to 2 small locations in South Texas, Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge, which is right on the coast, right on the border, and then some of the adjacent property. And this is about 100 individuals, but they've been having success with their captive breeding. And I was reading that they're considering and may have already initiated a 3rd population to add resilience to that population. There is a phenomenal documentary called The American Ocelot. It's on PBS, and the footage is just breathtaking. And I'd encourage you all to take a look. But that is the only breeding population of ocelots currently known in the United States. Their range used to be broader, it used to be more expansive, but it's been restricted to these small areas. The sign on the right is just kind of indicative of some of the threats to wildlife and to ocelots everywhere, but roads is a restricting factor for ocelots in Texas. In Arizona, as I've mentioned, we don't have a current known breeding population, though there is some evidence in the past, and I'll let Kinley talk about that. But in both Arizona and in Texas, ocelots are considered federally endangered and also listed as endangered on the state wildlife management, wildlife conservation organization plans. So they're been listed for a long time. Since the 80s, they were first considered an U.S. endangered species. They're listed as federally endangered um, for 40 plus years now. But there's only breeding animals in Texas that we know of. But Kinley, what are some of the evidence, or what is the evidence for ocelots in Arizona?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the historical evidence, like pre-2009 first. So if we think back to pre-2009, there was less technology on the landscape, and so a lot of our records are mostly reliant on either hunting records or skulls and pelts or carcasses that were recovered. And from 1887 to 1990, we had one fossil record and 11 other records of ocelot recorded. So over more than 100 years, we had only 11 records of ocelot, but in the state of Arizona. But really fascinating from 1980 to 2009, there was actually no detections of ocelot that we're aware of on the landscape in Arizona. So that's about a 30-year gap where we didn't have any new information on ocelots coming through. And that was thought to be due to illegal hunting and habitat loss that was driving these declines. But just really interesting fact there. So 11 records of ocelot and one fossil record from before 2009 is in Arizona's history. But I'm going to hand it off to Sue to talk about post 2009, what that looks like in Arizona.
Thank you, Kinley. Yeah, so for recent detections, and I'll be speaking just about the last 15 years, the the last 15 years where the University of Arizona Wildcat Research and Conservation Center has been monitoring both ocelots and jaguars. We have had 6 different ocelots on the landscape that we've monitored, which is pretty exciting. We monitored jaguar in the Huachuca Mountains briefly in 2011 and 2012. And then another second, and then that ocelot disappeared off the landscape, and another ocelot came to those exact same locations.
Wow.
Really demonstrating how they're finding the prey, they're finding the water, and that this ecosystem can support that species.
Right.
Interestingly enough, we call the jaguar, or I'm sorry to say jaguars, I meant ocelots. The ocelot, I do jaguar and ocelot research. I get so excuse me, but ocelot number 3, which was in that we monitored for several years in the Huachuca Mountains, then was, I don't want to say replaced, but once the ocelot number 4 came along, it wasn't seen much longer. And then ocelot number 4, though, was interestingly enough, it was treed by some hounds. And these are very sensitive, vulnerable species. And it moved all the way over into the Patagonia Mountains after that and was detected there. And then it moved back to the Huachuca Mountains. And that ocelot, the very same ocelot, exists there today. Some people have nicknamed it, yes, the fossilot, for being the oldest ocelot, and not just in Arizona or in the US, in the world. This ocelot now is over 15 years old. Never has an ocelot in the wild been detected that long. And so that's really exciting, and it's an indication that it is finding what it needs on the landscape. And it's still there. And
That's fascinating.
in 2013, our team was monitoring jaguars in the Santa Rita Mountains, and were absolutely surprised. We were training some new individuals, and they said, "Oh, look, I think you have an ocelot," not knowing like how this was a really big moment. First ocelot ever detected in the Santa Rita Mountains. And we
Wow.
detected that through 2013 and 2014 in the Santa Rita Mountains. We referred to that very clever ocelot number 5. And but real exciting to see that ecosystem, that landscape supporting an ocelot there. Um, and then that ocelot moved off the landscape, likely back south, because we are able to tell these ocelots apart by their spot patterns.
Awesome.
Another ocelot was detected in the Huachuca Mountains again. Ocelot that number 6 was detected. And so in the Huachuca Mountains, and important to note, that meant we had 2 ocelots on the landscape in the same mountain range in a very similar area that we were able to see. And unfortunately, Ocelot 6 did, Kinley brought up the threat of vehicles for these cats, and that ocelot was um, killed in a vehicular
Mm,
incident.
Mm.
And so it was not on the landscape very long.
mm,
Um, I will mention all of these ocelots have been males,
mm,
which is what we would expect because dispersing individuals that disperse from their breeding population are typically the males first.
Okay. So
Um,
no evidence of females in Arizona.
no evidence
Okay.
since we've been monitoring. And Kinley, do you know when the last female detection or Amen, I don't is of a female ocelot?
It was, well, I don't know the exact date, but I know it was from like pre-1980. There was only
Okay.
one individual that was confirmed to be female. And then the rest of the records are all either confirmed male or unconfirmed sex.
Okay.
So we
Okay.
know only one female. Eamon, do you know when that female was? I'm not familiar with like specific date of that female's record, but
Same. My understanding
yeah,
was it's like pre 1980.
yeah,
But
same.
it's so few females on the landscape. Primarily, we have males moving through.
Mm.
So, do you have an understanding, or do we have a guesstimate of how many we might have in Arizona right now, or how many known ocelots are being
Well,
detected?
yeah. So that was so number 6, unfortunately, died from the vehicle accident. Then number 7 was first detected by the Phoenix Zoo with the research Kinley was doing, which was really exciting. And that's the ocelot that Kinley, Amen, and I have been involved in kind of researching the distance traveled, which has been quite remarkable as that ocelot has been detected in multiple sky islands. And so uh, that ocelot, I don't know when our last detection is, but that ocelot is the one. Kinley can probably talk more about that, but all Sky Island Alliance, Phoenix Zoo, University of Arizona, and Center for Biological Diversity, we have all had detections of this ocelot in very diverse, different locations, which is
Right.
real interesting to research on distance traveled by these small cats. And then there's some more data, just very little on a possible ocelot 8, but that's a little bit, and that is on an ocelot that private citizens detected, and the whether that ocelot is on the landscape right now or not is undetermined.
Okay.
But all of these are males, and so these are that the amount of ocelots in the last 15 years, though. compared to, as Kinley pointed out, the last whatever 60, 80, is 80 years has really increased the frequency of new individuals on the landscape um, has increased, and that's exciting when we're looking at recovery of such a vulnerable species.
Awesome. Well, thank
Absolutely.
you so much, Sue. I think that sets up awesome, really well the next question. So, Kinley, what do we know about Ocelot number seven?
Yeah, so Ocelot number seven is quite a special guy, and he has been on the move, which is really exciting. And I think what's most, there's so many exciting moments about this Ocelot, but what's really great is that it's brought together so many of our partnerships now too to get to have this webinar and share across agencies about this little guy. So if we go to the next slide, I think it'll show us perfect. Okay, awesome. So the first detection of Ocelot number seven was with the Phoenix Zoo's research study in the Atascosa complex, and this was in June of 2024. And what was really exciting about this record is that this was actually the farthest west record for an ocelot in the state of Arizona. There's one other record that might have been farther west, but the actual specific location of where the ocelot was seen is highly contentious. People don't really know, it's unclear. And so this is the first formal, definitive record of an ocelot this far west in Arizona's known area for ocelot. It's also, as
Awesome.
you can see, across the Highway 19. It's left of Highway 19 even, or west of Highway 19. And then 6 weeks later, we had Ocelot number seven show up almost 80 kilometers or like 49 miles east in the Whetstone Mountains. And this record was recorded by the Center for Biological Diversity. And what's so special of this record, too, is that it shows, yeah, that almost 50 miles of distance traveled in 6 weeks, going across multiple highways, Highway 19, and then smaller state routes, 82 and possibly 83. And we don't know where he went on the in between. So this is a minimum distance traveled of almost 50 miles. So that in itself was already super exciting. But then the next record popped up by Sky Island Alliance in July of 2025. So almost a year later, our little number seven showed up again on Sky Island Alliance's cameras. And this was another 60 kilometers traveled, which is about 37 miles, farther kind of southwest now. But again, we only have this data from wildlife cameras. And so we don't know where he went in between. We just know that we had almost a year between detections, but he still was in Arizona a year later. And then last but not least, we got the record, or sorry, UA got the record. Sue Malusa with the Wildcat Conservation and Research Center got the record in the Santa Ritas I think it was a week later, yep, in July of 2025, another 18 miles farther north, and then a new mountain range for number seven. So that goes for a total distance of almost 111 miles recorded from our four different groups across four different Sky Islands in southern Arizona, which is just a spectacular distance covered and a really interesting story to share across our multiple groups. And then, Eamon, I think, do you want to talk about kind of where maybe he came from, our speculation there?
Yeah, thank you, Kinley. I think there's the natural curiosity of where these animals originate, where they come from. And Sue mentioned that, we've mostly been having dispersing males or entirely dispersing males into Arizona or solo males moving. And while we don't have GPS collars on these animals, we're just relying on these individual detections. So we cannot know definitively from where they came. But there is the most likely hypothesis is that they came from Rancho El Aribabi, which is a conservation property about 30 miles south of Nogales, a little south, a little east. And this is the northernmost known breeding population of ocelots. Sky Island Alliance was involved in 2011 through 2013 in documenting one of the first kittens, and I believe that's the next slide. Yes, this is a juvenile ocelot seen in Aribabi in 2011, which confirmed that there was breeding activity on this landscape just 30 miles south of the border. So generally speaking, we assume, which is dangerous, but we assume that these animals are coming from this region, the sort of south and east of Nogales, but there's a lot unknown, and much could still be discovered if we could, either put collars on these animals. Not saying we need to, but there's a lot of unknowns about where these animals come from. But it is really fascinating to think that this animal visited at least four our Sky Islands in southern Arizona that we know of, but it had to have traveled at least 30 miles before we even detected it. So this ocelot has moved immense distances, and in fact, it's the longest known movement by an ocelot anywhere within the range, anywhere within the continent, the two continents. And that's just through this kind of proliferation of cameras that have allowed us to document its movements.
Yeah. Hey, Eamon, do you mind? I see in the chat there's a lot of questions about what Sky Islands are, and I realize we didn't describe that very well. Do you want to take the first, yeah, jump at maybe helping people understand what Sky Islands are?
Yes, thank you, Kinley. Oversight on my part. That's a
No.
phenomenal question. Sky Islands is this evocative term, right? It stokes the imagination, but it refers to our mountain ranges in southeastern Arizona, southwestern New Mexico, northern Sonora, and northwestern Chihuahua, so our very own Four Corners. But these are 55 mountains in what is called an archipelago of mountain ranges. And what makes them unique from other mountains is that each mountain is completely isolated from a neighboring mountain by low desert habitat. So think mesquites, think your acacias, think your saguaros, your aucutillos, your other cactuses. That landscape and that habitat isolates and circles the base of these mountains so that animals within the higher elevations of the mountains are isolated in a similar sense to an island in the ocean, which is the origin of the name. Great question. Thanks, Kinley. So we talked a little bit about these cats and moving, and I wonder if Sue and Kinley, we touched on this briefly, but how do we know it's the same animal?
Go ahead,
Well,
Sue. Yeah.
oh, okay. I'll take that one. Thanks.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at these spotted cats and very much like jaguars as well, their spot pattern is just like a the best way to compare it is like a human fingerprint, no two are alike. And so the spot pattern of one ocelot is absolutely 100% unique to that particular individual. So we do a comparison and of multiple this is a really good graphic here about we don't just look at one location, but so we have to have it like on multiple places on the body and find a match to understand that that it's the same individual and if or whether or not it's different. That's how, and I'm just gonna, that's how we do it with photo data.
Okay.
Mhm.
There can do it with scat and genetics, genetic data differently, but with just a photo, and that's what most of this data is, that would be how we would do it. Kinley, maybe you have more to offer there.
No, yeah, no, that's perfect. And I just was going to add maybe that each side is even different. So the left side is different from the right side, which is really cool and also a little frustrating for some of us sometimes because you need to have a capture of both sides to know if it's the same species. So if the ocelot, walks in front of the camera showing its left side one time and its right side the next, it's you can't know if it's two individuals or the same species until you get something that confirms both those sides. So that adds a little tricky layer to it. But yeah, no, you described it perfectly, Sue. And you guys have been distinguishing the differences between the ocelots for over a decade at this point. So it's really interesting to figure that out for sure. So
Yeah,
Kinley, would
the
you?
spot patterns are pretty unique. So
yeah.
Yeah, I know, and it's frustrating. Like Kinley mentioned, that sometimes the photos are a little blurry, so you can't quite tell. And then
Yeah.
I think the guidelines are 3 to 5 at least unique spot points or spot collections of spots on different parts of the animal to know that it's the same animal. But Kinley, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relevance or the conservation value of these detections and what it might mean. for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we've all kind of touched on it a little bit, but the fact that this is the longest recorded dispersal distance of an ocelot in recorded history is such important knowledge and information for us. It provides us more information about the dispersal capacity of this species and also the resilience of this species. But it's also a reminder that southeastern Arizona is a critical region for ocelot habitat and survival. And so protections are needed, right, to maintain this connectivity for this species between the US and Mexico. And we're in a time right now where there's a lot of changes, and Eamon's going to touch on some of those, but right, like increased aridity, we've got the climate's so different year to year, even now, dry winters, wet winters, dry monsoons that are amazing and monsoons that we're just hoping for and it never comes. And I think those realities just show that these detections are the ocelots are resilient and that they are here in Arizona. And it's their historical range, but it's also their current range. And so all this information and kind of collecting more data on ocelots can help us further advocate for critical ocelot habitat to be designated and just for further understanding and sharing the message that ocelots are in Arizona and that we have these spectacular small cat species roaming throughout our Sky Islands. So really exciting information to be able to further add to our scientific toolbox and also to our communication strategies in talking about it with the public.
Thank you, Kinley. Excellent points. And actually, I think we have Cass Walker joining us today in the call. And I was wondering, Cass works with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Would you be interested in sharing a little bit about how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service uses
Yeah.
information about ocelots?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because I'm in the Fish and Wildlife Service and the ocelot is a listed species, we use this information to help us do our regulatory work under the Endangered Species Act. So you can think of Section 4, which is kind of our recovery. We do 5-year reviews, we write recovery plans, recovery implementation strategies. So all of this information that we get from citizen science data and people who share this information with us, we can make better decisions about recovery. We also use it when we are thinking about Section 7. So we work with our federal partners when they have actions on the landscape, trying to minimize effects of actions to listed species. So if we know where an ocelot is likely or reasonably certain to occur, we can, ask the action agency to take special minimization actions that might reduce effects to species. So it helps us do our job better when we get information and we know where they are generally.
For sure.
That's awesome. And just for clarity, could we talk a little bit about what Section 7 is?
Sure, yeah. Section 7 is a chapter or a section of the ESA that requires a federal agency, so not just Fish and Wildlife Service, any federal agency, to think about how their action will affect listed species.
Okay.
So we're thinking particularly of threatened and endangered species on our list. And, they work with us, the Fish and Wildlife Service, to undergo this process called consultation to kind of analyze how their effects might impact species on the landscape. And we try to minimize those impacts where we can.
Thank you, Cass.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so cameras are a powerful way to document, but there are some other tools we might have to
Yeah,
document listed species, dangerous species,
totally.
and ocelots.
Totally. And like, we're not only using camera data. We'll take data, certifiable, high quality data from whatever that looks like. So it could be camera data, it could be a video, it could be a photo, it could be auditory detections. I know there's an interest in that. We do that a lot with birds, putting out our recordings, listening for certain species. And also, as Sue was talking about eDNA, that's an absolutely great way to do that too. So if you're going to talk more about eDNA, I know Sue is your gal there. She's going to know all
Okay.
about that.
Well, thank you so much, Cass,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
providing that context. I really appreciate you hopping on, kind of spur of the
yeah.
moment there.
No,
Thanks.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Sue, eDNA.
Oh, okay. So environmental DNA. DNA, I was at a talk recently and people were like DNA, like what are you talking like a crime show DNA well, kind of actually. It's exciting. We want to see like what walk through that puddle. And so when we have a camera on the landscape, it takes a picture, motion triggered picture, but we're only seeing a snapshot of that one spot. And the environmental DNA, that's DNA left by an animal that's trace DNA in the environment through skin cells, hair, saliva, feces, urine, any biological matter. When we sample the water and how we are able to see what happened, not just right in front of that camera, but we can see what happened away from the view of that camera. So that might be a tributary, the water that fell came down into that pond, so that we can sample the biodiversity in a larger area. What we do for environmental DNA methods is I tell people just like we're not taking water because everyone thinks we're taking water to the lab. And actually, we're using a small pump and we pull the water through a filter. And it is, imagine like your coffee filter when you're done, you have the residual, you can see the coffee on the filter. So the water goes through this filter and then it's entirely non-invasive. The water goes right back to its source. But when it passed through this filter, it's left, we have collected the DNA. And then we take that filter and put it into a little test tube and add some reagent to it. And we bring it back to the lab and where it is processed. And then we can see what species were there. Just like the cameras, we can look at the data and say, oh, I had three skunks, a rabbit, a coati. The DNA is going to show us the same thing, but the DNA can go actually all the way down to the virus level. We can see a lot from that. And so that's another layer, another way to analyze what's on the landscape. So,
Fascinating.
and we also do scat.
Okay.
There you go.
And so
Everyone's favorite topic.
Yeah.
I know everyone's favorite topic. So we collect scat opportunistically on the landscape. We have used a trained scat collection dog at several times, but it's pretty costly to utilize those methods. But our team members, our citizen scientists, our volunteer researchers on this project, they're trained to be able to identify what would likely be a jaguar scat, which is sometimes mixed up with puma scat, but we can analyze that when it gets to the lab. But when we get jaguar scat, I mean, that's like a gold mine. And that can tell us the health of the animal. If you haven't previously detected male or female, we can see the sex of the animal. We can look at diet. So if people believe, oh, this particular species is, what they are or are not eating, we can tell you exactly what they're eating by looking at the scat. We can also see gene flow, population, like a relatedness. So there's a wealth of information in the scat. And so you can genetically, the first thing we do is genetic, before we do any like subsequent analysis, we just take it to the lab and ID whether or not it is or is not the species of interest. And then we do continued research on it. So that's another tool.
Thank you, Sue. That's awesome to think of technology and the various tools we have for documenting species, not just these rare species, but other species on the landscape. And I want to continue the conversation. We'll touch briefly on conservation challenges and then have some time for questions. And I think this will address some of the questions in the chat. It's kind of, the wall in the room, elephant in the room. The border wall is expanding exponentially across the U.S.-Mexico border. Soon, most of the region of the Sky Islands and pretty much the entirety of the Sky Island region will be walled. And what this means for wildlife is pretty dramatic. we have evidence. So the border wall, the spacing is about 4 inches between these steel posts that range from 18 to 30 feet tall. So most animals larger than a bobcat are restricted through the wall. They can't fit through that 4 inch spacing. We think, we have never seen an ocelot try, but we think structurally ocelots are fairly similar in width, like their breadth, their shoulder width to ocelot or bobcats. A little bit longer tail, but we think that because we've seen bobcats fit through the 4 inch spaces, we think ocelots might be able to. But the wall is just one piece of the puzzle, right? There is security lighting, there's wide stretches of border road that are patrolled regularly, there's razor wire, there's increased vehicle activity, and ocelots are a shy and reclusive species. So even if they can fit physically through that barrier, it's going to be a significant impedance to their return to Arizona. There are accommodations, they're called small wildlife openings or cat doors that are built into the wall. These are the size of a piece of binder paper, 8.5 inches wide by 11.5 inches tall. And they allow larger species to get through. Still not going to help your bears, still not going to help your deer or your turkey or your desert tortoises, but species like bobcats, gray foxes, and by inference, ocelots will be able to use these. There's just very few of these on the landscape. So the wall is going to block a lot of animals from moving freely across the landscape. And it's not the only challenge. Kinley mentioned climate change, increased aridity or drier seasons, less water on the landscape. This ocelot moved through southeastern Arizona, a landscape that is changing with a lot of development, more roads, more people, restricting where this animal can exist. We also are still experiencing rapid expansion of mines, and mines use up a lot of land, a lot of water, and may degrade the quality of this landscape for the animals. But they are resilient, and if we can find ways to protect their connectivity and ensure they can still get across the border from Mexico and into Arizona, and if we can enact some protections and keep them as a focus of conservation efforts, I think we may experience them for future generations. But we will close the sort of monologue or trilogue part of this conversation, and we'll start talking through some of the questions in the chat. I want to end with this wonderful video from Phoenix Zoo showing ocelot number 7 moving through the Atascosas. So looking through the questions, I see there were quite a few about the wall, and I hope we address that. In short, we think ocelots can fit through the wall, certainly if they include lots of cat doors or small wildlife openings.
Yeah. Eamon, do you want to touch on the secondary wall?
Ooh, not really.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Sadly, the U.S. has decided that one wall is not sufficient, and so in many stretches of the U.S.-Mexico border, including where this ocelot has moved in the Patagonia Mountains, they are actively building 2 parallel walls, 100 to 150 feet apart. Both walls are 30 feet tall. Both walls are 4 inches apart, the posts are 4 inches apart in both walls. So when that is completed, that is going to be a very significant border to anything because of how exposed the landscape is going to be between these two imposing structures.
Yeah.
And that double wall is coming for the Patagonias, the Huachucas, Oregon Pipe, Cabeza Prieta, and San Pedro River. So most of the important wildlife corridors will be walled with 2 walls if the plans are completed.
And I want to add that Sky Island Alliance has done amazing work in advocacy and trying to work with the Department of Homeland Security to find solutions in this area. And one of those would be, maybe lining up the little cat holes, they're called, the 8x11 pieces of paper, but it's not looking like that will be possible right now. So it's also awkward because a cat could potentially get through one of the cat holes, but then where do they find the other cat hole in the secondary wall? So that's a big concern of ours. And I think also important context is that when we detected number 7, all of us, the broad we detected number 7 in 2024 and 2025, the San Rafael Valley was open there was no wall connectivity or no wall built there. And then same with the Parita wilderness area and the Atascosas were also unwalled. And unfortunately, construction are almost completed in the San Rafael Valley and has begun in the Parita wilderness and Atascosa sections. So the landscape will look different than it did when we first saw Himdam number 7 arrive to Arizona.
Yeah, thank you for that context, Kinley. Um, Staying on the wall, there was a comment that there was some changes to the wall plans in the Rio Grande and the Big Bend that is ever evolving, and there's still lots of wall being built in the Rio Grande, the lower Rio Grande, I mean. There's a lot of wall existing, but those plans are ever evolving, and there has been some um, good news with plans changing to rely more on surveillance technology and physical barriers, but I'd still expect a lot of wall to be built in Texas in the next 2 to 3 years. Um, how about AI? Are we using AI for any of these processing, Kinley or Sue?
Ah, yeah, I mean, in some ways. So we worked together with 16 other organizations this last year to create a machine learning model that would be able to go through our wildlife camera data and identify species. So not just spotted cats, but also our skunks, our coyote, our gray fox. And the goal of that was to basically try to have all of us be able to get through our data much faster. For context, Sue, the number of images and videos that Sue's group has is probably incredible amount. For a smaller scale, our 50 camera, 18-month project in the Atascosa complex resulted in over 160,000 10-second videos. And as you can imagine, not all of those were animals. Working in that kind of a grassland ecosystem, we had a lot of what we refer to as blanks of no animals in them. So thankfully, in partnership with Skyline Alliance, with UA Wildcat Conservation and Research Center, and with 14 other partners, we work together to create a model that would be able to identify the species that we commonly see in the Southwest, to try to expedite the process of getting through our data. And so I think a lot of us now utilize that model just to help us get through the data much faster. So that's one way we're using machine learning and AI in this region to help get the conservation, help get the science out much more quickly. Sue, do you have more you'd like to add to that, or I don't, the astronomical number of photos you probably have?
Yeah, no, it's a lot of work to process data. Yeah, and we created an app for our team as well. And it's but the to keep the data moving so that the idea is that we don't process data for one project or one funding cycle or for a year, that everything all of us are doing, like Sky Island, Kinley. I know Sky Island's got a mountain of data. Kinley and our project, we have millions and millions of images, is that they become the part of utilizing some of this AI or these applications we built, is that the data becomes kind of timeless, and that we are able to see analyze that data over time. We can see range extensions where things, we can look at how for instance, everyone's talking about the border wall. We can look at that data. What did it look like 10 years ago? What does it look like now? What did it look, you know what I mean? Kind of like just to see uh that temporal level and of all the data is really important. So we can see the impacts of change on the landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Turning a little bit away from AI, there's been a couple questions around ocelots and other studies, and we touched on this, but a lot of the genetic analyses have focused on jaguars. Have you done any with ocelots yet, Sue?
We have done some. We have not done any scat analysis of for excuse me, for wait, where are we on ocelots though, right?
Ocelots, yeah. I wonder
Yeah,
if there's been genetic.
I'm so focused on jaguars. I do so much jaguar work. So, anyways, we did a lot of ocelot analysis of scat for ocelots in Mexico,
Okay.
where we had ocelot scat there, but we have never successfully obtained, and I had talked to Eamon about this just yesterday, any ocelot scat on the landscape in the last 15 years. It is so hard to find, and there are kind of theories is there another species? Is it buried? Or another species possibly eating it, or what's happening to that ocelot scat? So, short answer, no. A lot of ideas on where it is.
Yeah, and actually this is relevant. Just can't got a question about working dogs for conservation. And have we considered working with them?
Oh, yes. We just worked with them.
Yeah, thank you.
I
Yeah.
think Eamon was on the early calls with that organization. Fantastic organization. They came down here through a grant they had, and they worked with us. And we were looking for jaguar or ocelot scat. And we ID'd some what we believe is jaguar scat, and that's in our lab right now because that they actually just left a couple weeks ago.
Thank you, Sue. Um, there's a question about cats released on Buenos Aires. This is a relatively famous and apparently recurring issue where servals, an African cat that looks like an ocelot, they've been released into Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge, which is west of Tucson, near the border. Well, against the border, it's an open grassland habitat, and they have been detected several times out there, and have thrown wildlife biologists for a loop because it's unexpected and they look similar. But I don't have the most recent update. I think in the mid 2020s, 22 or 23 was the last time a serval was detected. Is that
Yeah.
correct, Kinley?
That's also my
Okay.
understanding. Yeah, I haven't heard any news on them in a couple of years now. So, and I know I think there used to be a sign like, have you seen this animal? And I haven't seen those signs in a while either. I
Yeah.
jokingly, they look similar but incredibly different also. They've got a different ear structure and different body shape and things. But when we got our record in 2024, I jokingly said I need to go back and double check and make sure that it is an ocelot,
Yeah.
which it was, of course. But yeah, when I made that joke, it had been years since the serval had really been talked about. So,
Is
Interesting.
Cass still on the call? I don't know if
oh, good point, Sue.
I think
Yeah, I'm here.
you didn't want to chat. Okay, Cass, can you chime in on servals?
Well, I mean, I can only echo what you have already said, is that is about the last time I have had it raised to me that it had been detected down there, is that mid 2020s ish, like 2023, somewhere in there, I think.
Okay.
I don't think I've heard anything about, yeah, nothing's been reported to me.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Beth.
Kat.
Um, we are nearing the end. I think there's time for a few more questions. There's a question about whether or not there's interest in collaring these animals to see where they're moving on the landscape. And I think that there's certainly an interest, and it's just a balance, right, of the cost and the impact to that animal and the conservation gains. And so I think it's something to consider carefully and perhaps consider DNA, scat with working dogs if we can further figure out how and where these animals are moving. But collaring would provide a lot of answers. And so perhaps there's a need for it in the future. And I think perhaps first in Mexico, and all of this is that we're seeing in Arizona speak to some of the conservation successes that have occurred in Mexico. The habitat is remaining is intact in some places, and there's been expansions of these populations, both with ocelots and with jaguars. So we are seeing increased animals on the landscape, and it may be because of all the great conservation work done in Mexico. And we are certainly not alone. There's wonderful groups working in
Yeah.
Mexico on wildlife conservation. Um, Either of you want to speak to the Northern Jaguar Project? Sue, do you collaborate with Northern Jaguar or Kinley?
We do,
Yeah,
and especially
awesome.
since I mean jaguars and us, populate the population, the source population in and of itself, that word, right? We don't have a population of jaguars or ocelots because we don't have a breeding population here on this side of the border. So when we have new detections, we always touch base with uh, Northern Jaguar Project and to see if this is a individual they've seen.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. And that's, yeah. And so when we first saw Ocelot number 7, we reached out to colleagues in Mexico to see if there were any records of this ocelot in Mexico. So there is substantial collaboration and NJP Northern Jaguar Project members on the Sky Island board. So we are working closely together with these organizations because we're one landscape, despite being two countries, and conservation
Yeah.
needs to span the border. All right, let's see, there may be time for one more. Any last minute burning questions?
I see a really good one. It's one that says, like, kind of basically, what can the public do to help with
Oh,
this issue? It's specifically said, is there legislation we can call our reps about to help? I think that would be a really great one to end on.
awesome. Well, we can have this as a group discussion, but I think letting legislatures know that border wall is kind of a bad thing to be spending money on, and that if border wall is built, there needs to be accommodation for wildlife, and that's something that the public can make their voices heard. Another piece of legislation, and this is a big one, but the mining laws and regulations in Arizona have not been updated in a very long time. Some of the permissions allowed to mining and water use and land use, and so working with mines to be a little bit less extractive. I know that's a crazy concept, but working to find ways to make mining a little less impactful. Kinley or Sue, do you want to add?
I think that's yeah, you hit the nail on the nose there. I just think also, like, all this area, these beautiful Sky Islands, a lot of them are public lands. It's re areas that we all can recreate in, and that's ours to take care of and to enjoy and to understand more about. And so I think just becoming even more familiar with the regions that we're talking about, maybe either exploring them. There's some great footage and videos and other projects out there, in addition to our three organizations here that are doing amazing work. And so I think just like becoming more aware of the public land area and then how the different challenges are impacting our various public land areas, and especially along the border, and especially in the context of border wall developments and also mining developments as well. I think from the zoo standpoint, what we're asking for is data-driven decisions, right? We have so many organizations that have amazing data showing the essential importance of connectivity in the region. And so making decisions with the best data that we have, that scientists and nonprofits and private people have also put their time and energy into to provide this data. And but mostly just better understanding our public lands and advocating for our beautiful Arizona landscapes that we're really fortunate to live amongst, and the wildlife and amazing biodiversity that we have around us.
Yeah, thank you, Kinley. I think that's a great place to end. Protect our public lands, protect the roadless areas. Don't. That's a legislation we can speak up about, is to not rescind or to not remove the protections of the wilderness areas.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, making your voice heard when you feel appropriate is always really helpful. Yeah, the more voices advocating for our public lands, for this region, for these species, the bigger difference we'll actually be able to make.
Well, I think this is a great place to end. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. A really special thank you to Sue and Kinley for joining and helping carry this conversation. Fascinating conversation about Ocelot number 7. But please follow along with our work. We'll keep you all posted on if and when this animal shows up. But lots of
Yeah.
exciting work by everyone here, and hope you have a lovely rest of your Thursday. Thank you all very much.
Cool.
Thanks, Eamon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.